Alright, in this lesson we'll talk about escape characters, which are special bits of syntax that allow us to do different things to strings. So we know by now that we generally use double quotes for strings. For example, I can do puts hello world. As it turns out, we can also use single quotes for strings. I can demonstrate right here an example of a string with a single quote, and we see no difference currently on the output on the right side. In the next lesson, we'll actually explore the differences between using single quotes and double quotes, but for now, they're basically the same when it comes to basic characters. Now, when might you want to use one over the other? Well, one case is whenever you want to use the opposite quote within the context of the actual string that you're outputting. So for example, if I have something like Juliet said goodbye to Romeo, and I have goodbye internally represented as something that's supposed to be surrounded by quotes, what I can do is put double quotes on the outside to begin my actual Ruby string, and single quotes on the inside, and those are going to be interpreted as actual single quotes, and we're going to have no problem printing them out right here. I can similarly swap the two, so I can begin my string here with single quotes and write Juliet said goodbye to Romeo. This time the goodbye is what's surrounded by double quotes, and we're not going to have any issues printing here either. There is variation between the quote type that begins the string and the quote type within the string. But we're going to run into an issue where we have to use the same type of quote within our string. So let's take a look. Let's say I wanted to output the exact same string, but I only wanted to use double quotes. So I could write something like Juliet said, and then watch what happens when I start typing. It's already going to start showing me some issues with my syntax. Alright, so you can see here, I wrote Juliet said goodbye to Romeo, and my goodbye within my string is surrounded in double quotes. Well, Ruby is going to run into a big fat error here. I can show you it on the right side. Big error here. So what's going on? Well, remember that Ruby looks for the beginning and the end of a string by the presence of quotes. It doesn't matter whether it's single quotes or double quotes, but it does need consistency. So when we begin this Ruby string right here, Ruby is not having any problem until it runs into this quote right here. And rather than understanding that this is part of our goodbye expression within the quote, Ruby actually thinks that that represents the end of our string, and thus it's completely confused about these random letters goodbye that come after it, and basically it crashes. What we have to do here is tell Ruby that these quotes are to be escaped, which means ignored or disregarded. The way we do that is by putting a backslash in front of the quote. So if I put one backslash here and one backslash here, you'll see that my color syntax has changed. We're back to normal. Now, the important thing to note here is the backslash itself is not going to appear in my output. If I preview this, for example, on the very last line, no backslashes are present. The backslash is our technical way of telling Ruby that the character that's upcoming, in this case the double quotes, is to be ignored. The quote or the character will still be printed. The backslash just allows it to be printed instead of being misinterpreted as the end of the string. Similarly, if I try this example with single quotes and I write puts Juliet said goodbye to Romeo, you'll see we're running into the exact same problem here. And this time we can apply the exact same thinking. So if we put a backslash before our single quote within the string, in fact both of them, that's telling Ruby to ignore the character that is upcoming. So now we can properly output this, and you can see Juliet said goodbye is totally printed out just fine. Goodbye is surrounded by single quotes, and our whole string is represented by single quotes here. So we have no issues with that. So whenever you're running into an issue where an internal character is being interpreted improperly, you can place the backslash in front of it to tell Ruby to basically ignore it or treat it as literal and actually output it in the output. Let's now take a look at a couple additional syntax options we have to modify our strings. I'm first going to clear my output here. There we go. And now let's talk a little bit about line breaks. So if I do puts, and I'm going to put out, let's add a line break right here. Let's say I wanted to force a line break right here between the break word and the right word. How do I do this? I do this with a special syntax. It's going to be backslash followed by n. That n is short for new or new line. So whenever we want to force a line break, instead of simply writing a new put statement, we can insert that combination of characters. This is a special syntax that tells Ruby one line break right here. So when I output this, you can see its output right here, and right here, in fact, is being thrown off to the very next line. You'll notice that I didn't put any space between the /n and the beginning of the right word, and the reason is because as soon as that /n is done, everything is still being interpreted literally. So if I leave this space in here, Ruby will think I mean put a space right there at the beginning of the new line, and you can see right here will be a little bit offset because there's a space in front of it. So it looks a little bit awkward because you're kind of clumping together these words and then putting together /n. But remember, /n represents a line break, so you don't need to surround them with additional spaces, or those spaces will appear. Here we are back to normal on the right. Another important caveat is to remember how the puts method and the p method work. They work a little bit differently. If instead of outputting this right here, I assign this to a result variable, we're going to have a different output if we puts result versus p result. Remember that puts is going to actually give us the visual representation, so everything is going to be broken up. The line breaks are going to be visually present. P is more scientific, it's more technical, so instead of actually creating the line breaks, P is going to show us those /n's when it outputs the string right here. Okay, so P can be particularly effective when you're working with a string, and you might be wondering, are there any line breaks here? Are they represented? Because when you view them visually, it may not immediately be clear. Something may simply reach, let's say, the end of the line, and you may think that it's beginning again on the next line when it simply may be an intentional line break, something like that. You can use P to see those /n's and immediately identify that that is a forced line break within that string. All right, so puts and P work a little bit differently here. Finally, let's take a look at one more / thing that we can do, and that's creating a tab. So I'm going to clear my work and once again do puts, and let's say insert a tab right here. If I want to insert a tab, which is an indented space at the beginning of my output, much like you'd put on something like a paragraph, what you can do here to represent it, instead of doing this silly, spacing stuff, is simply to put /t. So once again, \t, that T is short for tab, and that's going to create an output where the text is pushed a little bit to the right. We can see that T inserts that space right here. In comparison, a regular put statement, this is normal, is going to begin closer to the beginning of the text output right here. This little white space is created by that /t. So as you can see, the / serves a variety of purposes in Ruby. We can use it here for tabs, we can use it to force a line break in our strings, and most importantly, we can use it to escape characters, which means tell Ruby to ignore a specific character if it's going to cause some kind of issue within our code. And in the next lesson, we'll take a look at the differences between single quotes and double quotes.